with this. It's the backronym that won't quit. And I'm Leif Johansson, chair, along with Prachi Jain from Fastly, who's remote today. Let's flip the slides and look at our agenda. All right. So we're going to do the usual intro, and then we're going to let spend quite a bit of time, since this is the first working group meeting, on an introduction, and then we are going to talk about sort of the proposed solutions for solution space for the use case, for the problem statements, and then we're going to see where we take it from here. Next slide. So since this is the IETF, and since this is a new working group, note well. Some of you have probably never seen this before. You may be new attendees, and there's a whole lot of material behind this summary. Go read that material and make sure you understand it before you contribute. Next slide. IETF also has a code of conduct summarized in these 4 bullets. And for this meeting, we also require mask at all times for meeting, especially in the meeting rooms. The only people who can take off their masks during meetings are the people who are at the mic presenting. And remote. Yes, very funny. All right. With that, I'm going to invite our initial contributors to the working group to come and present sort of the problem statement that led to this work being established. This is what we typically do in the IETF, the first working group meeting. We spend a little time making sure everybody understands what we're actually going to be doing. That's not what we're going to be doing for the next and subsequent working group meetings when we're going to be actually doing work. Anyway, so I don't know which of you is going to come up and present the slide. So Casey? All right, so there we go. We're gonna see if we can get the magical sort of remote control thingy working here. There we go.
Ready? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. This is for the Tigress working group. My name is Casey, and I will be presenting alongside Alex and Dimitri, who are sitting right here in front. Next slide. So this is just a little look over our agenda for today. We're going to start off by talking through our problem statement for the working group, the goals, vocabulary, and move into some use cases, requirements, and what is considered out of scope for the working group. And we'll pause for a Q&A session after that, and move on to our proposed solution, and then a diagram of our stateless and stateful working flow, which all makes sense when we present. So I just ask that if you have questions, you wait until the Q&A session at the end of each of these 2 sections. Next, I just wanted to list up our authors and contributors. You can see there's quite a big list that's gone into contributing to this. To note, we have Matt Byington, also from Apple Online, and Nick Shaw from Alphabet that will be help fielding questions during the Q&A sessions. All right, with that, we'll get started with the problem statement. So as the prevalence of digital wallets has expanded, there are more and more ways for the average user to add digital credentials to their wallets. Users wanting to take full advantage of the convenience and security offered by these digital wallets are moving towards ditching their physical keys entirely. Naturally, many scenarios come up in an everyday life where you'd want to share your key with somebody else, and we're looking to find a solution for that. So digital wallets exist on many different device types, as well as device operating systems. In addition, digital wallets have expanded to allow for different types of credentials or verticals to be added. For example, hotel keys, car keys, and home keys. Each solution has its own complexities, and we seek to find a standardized solution for all of these. So kind of our core problem statement is that today, no standardized method exists in a cross-platform, cross-vertical capacity that would enable users to share their credentials. So we have three main goals for this working group. Our first goal is to minimize friction for sharing and cross-platform and cross-vertical sharing. So our goal is to create a layer on top of existing protocols like HTTP to simplify the communication between devices of different operating systems. We are not trying to create a new communication protocol by any means. Our goal is to define a simple set of APIs that can be implemented by any party while that party is leveraging their current ecosystem and their own implementation of secure credentials. This will allow us to minimize friction both for a new user that's trying to learn how to share, as well as a new device OEM that's looking to implement sharing as well and being part of the network. Our next goal is to maintain access control. So when a sender is sharing with their recipient, that sender is actually approving that recipient for a subset of their own access so that that recipient can go mint their own credential with the Credential Authority. If two people were to share the exact same key, we wouldn't actually be able to maintain access control because we'd never know who was using a key at what time. And so say I have one hotel key and I'm sharing it with all my coworkers, which is not the case, we have our own rooms, but we wouldn't be able to just block one of us. We'd have to block all of us or none of us. So our goal here is to maintain access control throughout the whole sharing process, including while you're in the transfer in case either party wants to back out at any moment. And lastly, we have a lot of security and privacy goals. We will be talking about them later in the slide deck, but we just want to make sure that all of these goals and requirements are met so that we have the safest experience for our users while also maintaining a nice user experience. So I'm just going to define some quick problem vocabulary. All of these are defined in our charter, I think, as well as our draft, just so that you are aware while we move on. So first, we have the Credential Authority. So this is an entity which facilitates credential information lifecycle on a device. So lifecycle might include provisioning of that credential information, termination, or update. So you can think about if you have a hotel key, the Credential Authority would be the hotel company that owns all those hotels and is saying, oh, I have access to XYZ room. Next, we have Credential Information. This is the information that's actually used to transact with that data point or that access point. So it says yes, you can actually open that lock. Next, we have the provisioning information. This is the data structure transferred from the sender to the recipient that comprises the data both necessary and sufficient to provision it to the receiving device. Next, we have the sender device. So this is the device that initiates the transfer of provisioning information to the receiver device. And in contrary, we have the receiver device, which is the device receiving that provisioning information so that they can use it to register or provision that credential information with the Credential Authority. And lastly, we have the relay server. So you can think of this just as an intermediary server. And for our purposes, we call it the relay server, but it could go by any name. So with that, I'll pass it on to my coworker, Alex.
Thanks, Casey. Now we'll be looking at some common use cases across three distinct verticals. First, we'll look at car key sharing. Let's say Ben owns a vehicle that supports digital keys which comply with the CCC open standard, and Ben would like to let Ryan borrow his car for his weekend. Or let's say Sam is going out for dinner and would like to park their car with the valet at the restaurant. In both of these scenarios, Ben and Sam would need to share their car key with another person. Second, we'll explore home or residential key sharing. Let's say Brandon owns an apartment and is having Abby visit over the weekend. He would like to give Abby access to the apartment while she is visiting. Or let's say Sarah has a housekeeper that comes weekly and Sarah wants to give them access to the front door and only the front door. In these cases, sharing a digital key would provide an easier and more secure experience than having to give someone a physical key. And digital keys can be revoked at any time. So in the unlikely event of a personal falling out, the key could be removed without having to coordinate with the receiver to get back the physical key. And third, hotel key sharing. Let's say Fred is staying at a hotel next week and the hotel supports digital access credentials, and Fred added their credential to their phone. His partner, Daphne, is joining later, and Fred wants to send them the hotel key digitally so they can access the room when they arrive. Or let's say Lexi is staying in a large hotel room that they are sharing with several people, and Lexi wants to share the digital key to other guests so they can access the room. These are just some common use cases we are working to solve with this working group, but you could imagine many more use cases that will arise as digital keys become more prevalent. And we're focusing on the digital key use cases because that was our first use case, but there are tons of other use cases where credentials need to be transferred between devices securely. So next, we'll talk about requirements and constraints for the solution that this working group creates. We expect our solution to have some general properties in order to facilitate a secure credential transfer. A sender should be able to initiate the share over any communication channel, for example, email, SMS, WhatsApp, etc. And a recipient should be able to view a preview of the share before accepting it. The sender device and receiver device should be able to perform multiple round-trip communications within a limited time frame after the initial share has been accepted, and the receiver should be able to request additional provisioning information if needed. The solution should not require that both the sender and receiver device are online at the same time, and this is especially important for mobile devices using cellular data. And the solution should support opaque message content based on the credential type. And because the message content is opaque, the solution should be able to handle arbitrary message formats, including those adhering to public standards like the Car Connectivity Consortium and proprietary or closed community formats. And the sender and receiver should be able to manage the transfer process and interrupt it at any time. Digital car keys represent access to very expensive assets, and residential keys grant access to where people are staying. So it is crucial that bad actors are unable to obtain digital credentials while they are being transferred. So sufficient security measures must be embedded in the protocol in an effort to ensure only the intended recipient is able to provision the credential, and to ensure the credentials can only be provisioned once, anti-replay attacks. And we also want to ensure the sender has the intent to transfer, proof of the fact that the share initiation is attributed to a valid device and a valid user. In addition to our security goals, it is also crucial that a user's privacy is protected while transferring a credential. So aside from network level metadata, the relay server should not learn information about the sender or receiver. The relay server should not be able to create associations between different shares, and they should not be able to create a social graph. The relay server should not be able to see sensitive details of the share, like the provisioning information. And the relay server should not be able to provision the credential itself, acting as an intermediary for the receiver or a person in the middle attack. And this is especially important because the relay server could have thousands of mailboxes full of provisioning information, and the provisioning information is necessary and sufficient to redeem a credential. So a lot goes into provisioning, managing, and using a digital credential. And this working group is only focused on the transfer of the provisioning information. So most of that is going to be out of scope for us. And as part of the credential transfer, some key aspects of the flow are also out of scope. For example, defining the mechanism the receiver will use in order to provision the credential with the Credential Authority is out of scope. And similarly, the mechanism the sender device will use to get the provisioning information from the Credential Authority is out of scope. And the user interface that is displayed on the sender and receiver device during share initiation and share redemption is out of scope for us, and this will largely depend on the device manufacturer's interface guidelines. And finally, defining the format for each field within the encrypted data is out of scope. For example, the provisioning information message structure stored on the relay server. And we hope by now we are able to provide a clear picture of the problem this working group is hoping to solve, and we hope we've piqued your interest in the problem space as well. Before jumping into the solution, we'll be happy to answer questions about the problem presented.
All right, I see people running virtually at the mic, so it's fine to run to the mic.
Hi, I'm Jim Fenton. when I look at your problem statements, and I've skimmed your draft, when I look at the problem statements, I think of, let's take the hotel room case. If I want to have my partner let into my hotel room, I would get my partner's public key, tell the hotel, let the person with this that proves ownership of this public key into my hotel room, and problem solved. Similar situation for the others that you're showing. So I think of this as an authorization problem. Why is that simpler, I think, solution not responsive to your requirements?
So our protocol is really more of a transfer protocol, not authorization. And so we could allow any sort of authorization to take place. For example, something like you are talking about where with PKI could be transferred over the relay server and then back to the recipient device, which is how car key sharing works. Or other completely disconnected types of credentials like hotel keys, which are symmetric keys.
Well, they don't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it seems like you're focused on a particular protocol rather than on the problem statement.
Mhm.
Is that true?
Um,
That you have particular protocol that you want to fit into this requirement rather than trying to solve a particular problem? Because you started with a problem.
So yes and no. The problem here is that we're trying to cover multiple credential types, right? And simply speaking about hotels, some of them use symmetric key, some asymmetric key pair, and the example you gave with the public key of your partner, it covers like asymmetric key pair, right? But it doesn't cover the case with the symmetric key. And at the same time, we specifically mentioned that we want to have granular control over the credential, which means if I'm sharing the same key with my partner and the key is revoked, it's revoked for both of you.
No, but the example I gave you that granularity as well.
Yep.
I'll
Mhm.
let somebody else.
Hi, Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. Thanks for bringing this forward. Obviously, this is something that we're all going to be dealing with as more and more things require digital authentication. So I appreciate you thinking about it. I wonder whether you have any perspective on the hotel example and sort of the valet or housekeeper example. I think are interesting, where you have different authorities that are there. Right? I can imagine that a hotel doesn't want me to share my key with the 5 folks that I met at the bar last night. But at the same time, if I want to give somebody access to my car so they can drive me home, I don't feel like I need to share that information with the car manufacturer, though the car manufacturer might disagree. So I'm wondering what your perspective is on the on whether the framework that you're building will like who controls knowledge about the different parties that are involved in your framework. Can you speak to that?
So all of that is owned by the Credential Authority at the end of the day, and based on the use case, the Credential Authority could be, the hotel chain, or for car key, it's you're the Credential Authority, and so it's out of scope for this working group what the Credential Authority does. We're just facilitating the transfer of the provisioning information that's used to get the credential information.
Before we go on, because there's been a little bit of confusion in the chat about this working group. This is not in fact a working group forming both. It's a working group, right? So there is a charter, etc. And the purpose of this presentation is to make sure that everybody understands or has a chance to catch up to and understand the problem description, right? So like let's try to zero in our comments and questions to clarifying and making sure that you have a chance to understand what's going on, rather than propose alternative solutions to the same problem.
Yeah, I'm not trying to. I want to be clear. I'm actually
good.
asking this as a clarifying question because I want to understand what we're thinking the scope is here.
Perfect.
Because I mean, I can imagine there being car manufacturers, and I won't name them, but I could imagine there being some car manufacturers who think they are the credential authority for their cars. And if I own a car, I would like to think that I am the credential authority for my car. And how will this architecture that you're designing here make that ownership level clear? And will it allow someone to say, I would like to take ownership over this car from the manufacturer?
No. So this, great question, by the way. This protocol would not make any distinction on who the Credential Authority is or enforce any opinions on it. I think the entire relationship between the sender and receiver device and the credential authority. We're hoping not to tackle with this working group.
Yeah, and in addition to your question, just to provide additional context for those of you that don't work with digital credentials every day. So those relationships between like the actual device that has a secure credential and then that credential authority, if they're not in an open standard like the Car Connectivity Consortium, the CCC, then it's up to that device OEM to really communicate with that credential authority to figure out what's their technology and what is their needs. So each time you talk to them, it's like each one you have to basically do your own battle and make sure those privacy pieces and those ownership pieces are like maintained as much as possible. Those things are so complicated, and we definitely don't want to tackle that within this transfer, but it is something we think about a lot.
Sam Weiler. I'm concerned about that answer, and the word I would have used is permissionless. As the user, I want to be able to do these things without seeking the permission of the relying party or the CA, whether it's giving out keys to my hotel room or giving out keys to my car. Or, and here's the question for you about the scope, how do you see this relating to FIDO, WebAuthn, passkeys, pick your name of them? How do you see it relating?
Thank you for the question. That's an awesome remark. And we specifically mentioned that we want to distinguish the credential transfer from provisioning. A lot of your questions will be covered with the provisioning, the relation between sender, receiver, and the credential authority, right? So that part is out of scope for us because, let me say why. Because there are variety of different protocols. Some of them are open standard, some of them proprietaries. When we're referring to CCC, Car Connectivity Consortium, part of the provisioning is covered in the standard, and you can go and read the standard. They definitely will use authorization mechanisms. We use them to, for instance, to provide assurance that the share or provisioning information was generated on authentic device by a user. So we use WebAuthn.
I think this isn't quite answering where I'm going in my head with the use case, which is I want to give someone else access to a particular website. Use my United.com credential. And United wants to stop me from doing that. I want to be able to do that without seeking their permission. Will this help me? That's disappointing.
Yeah, so this might not be the answer you want, but this cannot help you with that. And that's actually, in a sense, by design. We wanted this system to know nothing, you know, especially after the share. And you'll see, you saw in those, in the privacy requirements, we wanted to make sure this system could not create that sort of, like, couldn't know anything about that user, anything about that share, or create a share network between everyone.
Let me just quickly remind everybody who's at the mic that you need to get on the mic queue in order to stand up at the mic. Okay, in that case, and make sure to sign up on the, scan the QR code and sign up on the blue sheet as well.
I'll be really quick.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, just to finish the answer to the question, I just think basically to do the things that you're saying, I think you would actually need to go away from some of those privacy requirements and have this be a much smarter system than what it really is. To be able to to control that stuff from the sender versus what it is really just transferring that one piece of data from sender to receiver. And hopefully when we go over the solution, when Dimitri presents the solutions, it'll make a little bit more sense.
Hi, Michael B, UK NCSC. I've got a question about the architecture that relates to the relay server. Specifically, we're sort of implying that we definitely need it in this problem statement and discussion of the goals. Do you think a lot of this could be accomplished without the use of the relay server in the middle? Okay, fair enough. Okay.
Yes, potentially you could use like different solutions, but this one is specific for this narrowly defined problem. And we implemented certain mechanisms to address the goals and the requirements to this given problem. You could use some maybe S3 buckets with some extra mechanisms over The
Okay.
problem is solvable in multiple ways, and our proposal is just one of the way to solve it.
Okay. Thanks. I was just thinking that you've already got a secure channel from the sender to the recipient, so there's an awful lot you could put in that. If we don't actually need it, then well, we mentioned WhatsApp, emails, whatever. Those are off. Those are asynchronous. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Eric Squirrel, Mozilla. So I guess 2 points. One, a procedural point. This is not a working group forum bot. It's not a BOF. You're correct. But also, this presentation is not the thing that's chartered. This presentation is their view of the thing that's chartered. And so the questions that are out of scope are only the ones that are removed by the charter, not by this presentation. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your presentation. I just want to clarify what is up for debate and what is not. Can you go back to the security requirements, please?
Oh, did you get it? I can just, well, Prachi can step back.
Maybe this is, okay, maybe I'll just do it verbally.
Prachi, I think you need to give permission.
It's okay. You said you want to not have replay attacks. Why?
Why not have replay attacks? Do you want to go?
I know what a replay attack is, but why is that a problem in this case?
So the problem, let's say you share, since we're passing credential, like provision information separately from the link, right? That link can be copied and sent to whoever want to provision that credential, right? And let's say 10 people at the same time want to provision the same pass in their wallet, and we definitely want to prevent that. So
Sorry,
only the first.
you have to start from the beginning.
Okay, so yeah, I understand the question. Why do we want to prevent a replay attack? So, and reason is obvious. We don't want the same credential to be added to 10 different people without the original intent of the sender. So if the sender wants to send it to their partner, we want only the partner to be able to redeem that. Sure.
You seem to be making some very strong assumptions about the receiver of the message.
It's a very strong assumption between the receiver and the Credential Authority.
Again, what I'm trying to drill into is that by the time I've received the credential, it is mine to send around. And so you absolutely can ensure that there'll be only one interaction between the receiver and the Credential Authority, but that does not ensure that I only copy the credential. And so I'm sure you're about to tell me it's a trusted hardware module on the receiver, but that's not like that. I'm pointing at that as like that's an assumption you're making that is not like necessarily a valid assumption.
I think another reason that we wanted to avoid anti-replay attacks as a security requirement is that if there's no, if we have that security requirement, then we can have more of an easy user experience around the actual security of the transfer if the link is short-lived and the mailbox is short-lived.
No, I still don't understand that.
I think you have probably a good point with this. Do you mind if we take this to the mailing list and dig into it? Oh.
Well, I guess I think.
Happy to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think there is an implicit assumption in this entire presentation that these credentials are embodied in some sort of piece of trusted hardware and are not available to people who own the device. And like that may be well true, but like that should be documented, and I have to decide if that's something you want to assume or not. Because
Matt, I'm happy to help try to answer this. I think we should separate out the constructs here, right? And I'll try to keep this short, but I don't think it's related to hardware in any way, shape, or form, right? The way that the credential is housed on the device, whether it's in a secure chip or not, is not the question. I think specifically what we want to avoid here, or what we're trying to guarantee actually, when a sender wants to share a credential with the receiver, right? There's the ability for a single receiver, and that is the goal of this charter is to share it with a single person, to have that transfer of the credential only be redeemable for a credential by one party that does not preclude that party from not further sharing the credential. And that is encapsulated in the design, if that makes sense. What we don't want to have happen, though, is the sender initiate a transfer, obtain the necessary material from the Credential Authority to facilitate that transfer, and let more than one receiver receive that transfer. That
How would
is,
that
I think, more than an assumption. That is a distinct goal.
How would that happen?
We
So-
utilize a number.
Sorry, Dimitri, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we utilize a number of security mechanisms that are defined in the draft document.
I've read the document.
Okay, so
I'm asking you to describe the threat model.
precisely when we establish that channel between two devices, the binding, right? It enforces the fact that only a single receiver can read that info.
no.
So
Okay, different.
before we get into that discussion, because we're getting into the sort of the part of the, when a little bit later, we're going to go through the proposed sort of first version of the draft that's kind of linked to this working group. And maybe we should try to stick with the, like the problem statement part of this before we get to the into solution space.
Okay, but I'm
It
asking.
just helps.
But I'm asking for the threat model. Actually, I'm asking for the threat model.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I guess my point is that you're sending a link around, and so like if you want somebody to sit down, okay. But if you're sending a link around, like how does the link get redeemed on multiple people if you don't provide the security mechanism you claim you provide? How does the other person get a handle on the link?
So
You-
I'll try to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, so I want to share the credential with DKG, and I share the link with DKG, and so, well, okay, but you could just put the key up on the slides. Is my point. And so I'm trying to understand is, aside from DKG's malfeasance, which already allows the key to be shared, what is the attack model?
Well, I think to Casey's point, I think we need to separate security mechanisms that would prevent that individual from sharing the key itself once sharing is complete from a potential threat in the sharing itself. So for the actual transfer of the credential, what you want to avoid specifically is you send a link to your friend and that friend posts it online and anybody with that link could then redeem for a credential. That is a different problem than if you send that link to your friend, they provision the credential, and then they share the actual credential itself. Those are two different problems, and our yeah, go ahead.
But it's only a different problem because you think that he can't see the key. Because you think
No.
the key is in a box and he can't see it.
No,
Otherwise,
I think it's a different. I think it's a different problem because mechanisms used to protect a cryptographic key are different from mechanisms used on a protocol for sharing keys.
Yes, I don't think it's responsive, but okay. We'll pick this up later.
So this discussion kind of does beg a question that chairs have been meaning to bring up, and that is maybe that the working group does need a separate problem statement draft, and that could include a clear threat model discussion. So I think it's something to keep in mind here that it maybe is a document that doesn't exist today, but needs to be written. Remember, the working group doesn't actually have any adopted working group drafts yet, right? But it's a good point that you make, Eric, that a good threat model is a sort of integral part of this. Now, Michael, do you want to, Michael? Oh, you're already, all right. So I'm going to take you off cue. Wayne?
Hey, this is Wayne from Spruce. Just wanted to confirm some understandings I think I have about this and ask if something could be possible. So one thing is it seems that the model relies on a pre-shared symmetric encryption key for the mailboxes, right? And that's been so far. So the setup is kind of out of scope, right? And you would have to use some other protocol, whatever that is, right?
Yes and no. So we, dependent on the security model, like we define that certain credential verticals may require more secure solution. What we propose for the solutions which are not that important to attach the secret to the URL, which probably Eric is calling out here. But for some use cases, that might be secure enough, given that the channel being used to transfer that share is trusted.
Okay, and the follow-up is a little different direction. So Intentionally, it's an opaque token format, so it can potentially conform to other standards bodies out there across different verticals, right? And that's good. And I guess that also would not preclude like an authorization credential model that could be like bound to a different key or something. For example, instead of sharing the private key material through this protocol, you could share a delegation to a different key that opens the hotel room. Is that model possible?
Yes, exactly. And we think that model would be like all of the use cases that we're hoping of, or
Okay,
talking
thanks.
about, definitely not sending private keys, hopefully.
Peter?
Hi, it's Peter from the ESEC. Yeah, so the proposal doesn't deal with the credential logic itself, right? So what the credential, what's the name, authority or something does is out of scope. So are any problems that may be resulting from, for example, sharing a secret symmetric key? It's all out of scope, which is fine. And so we just assume that there already is a credential and it's an opaque set of data fields, and that's somehow the combined set of credential information and provisioning information, if I got that right. And the goals are that only the recipient can use it and enter replay, and the server knows nothing, and participants don't have to be on it at the same time, and content is opaque and all that. And it just sounds very much like the requirements for sending any secret message, not specifically credentials. My question is, in what way the proposal does go beyond any other protocol to send secret messages between two parties who have some kind of setup with, let's say, symmetric keys they exchange beforehand, or for example, the signal protocol, which already is around. And I presume that probably your problem you're trying to tackle is different, because otherwise you wouldn't be making the effort. But I don't see that in the problem statement yet. So if it does go beyond just exchanging secret messages between participating parties, then I think the problem statement needs to be extended to explain in what way that's different, because I don't understand it so far.
Thank you. That's a very valid question. So if we're comparing that to the problem with sending an encrypted message, so we need to split it into two pieces, right? So establishing secure channel, and then like send encryption message there. So sharing the secret, pre-sharing secret, and then encrypting data. Here, what we want to achieve is to share the encrypted content and the link to that content like separately, secret and the content, they go through different channels. And we don't want to use, we don't want to introduce a mechanism of pre-shared secret, like if it explains it. And this is very narrow scoped for credential transfer. Like we have, let's say, some provision information, which in kind is a token, right? And we want eventually that information be passed to and from between two parties, like a ping pong. And we want to make sure that only two actors can exchange that information for a given mailbox.
Okay, so you just mentioned some kind of link that is one thing, and then there's another thing. So I didn't see that requirement in your list of requirements. It would be cool if you could add it. And I had another thought.
I think that is kind of where it gets into the proposed solution, right? And Eric is actually quite correct. Both of these things are proposals yet, right? We're talking about
Yeah, I
sort of
tried to
proposals.
stay away from the solution.
Yeah, we're coming to that, right? We're,
Okay.
you know, I just don't want us to lose track of time. And
Okay, cool.
and we have a few people on the queue, and we're gonna stop the queue right after Victor, and let's try to have a little bit of time left for the rest of. So Ian.
Can you all hear me okay? Cool. Ian Williams with AWS. I noticed that your protocol here implies a certain amount of trust between the sender, recipient, and the relay. I'm wondering, like, is there any consideration for if the relay agrees to be a part of this operation? For example, if I, as a sender, tell the recipient my mailbox is at momandpopburgershop.com, they might not enjoy if the recipient starts asking them for keys. for this credential. So I'm wondering like what kind of considerations might be made there.
That's a great question. Appreciate it. Yes, there is a consideration specifically for share initiation when a sender device creates the mailbox, right? So we don't want to trust anyone. There is a relation between the sender device and the relay server, which means the share and the relay server probably would be implemented by the same party to establish that trust. So we have a mechanism of attestation which covers the whole content of the mailbox. And relay server, before accepting that information, needs to be able to verify the content and verify the root of trust, like whether it's produced by the authentic device, etc. For the recipient, it's less important because, like, we think that recipient, they have a mechanism of see what they accepting, and they trust. They need less trust, let's put it this way, to the relay server, because they have a link coming from their friend over a separate channel, and they probably know that friend, right? They know their phone number, URL, they can make a call to the friend. And there are additional mechanisms which we propose in the draft document, such as verification codes that can be communicated using voice or other mechanisms.
Yeah, I saw the verification codes that may be used between sender and recipient, but I didn't see how that would again connect to the relay server because that seems to be kind of the mutual body between the three of them here. Again, using the mom and pop burger shop as an example, they would probably not enjoy the added traffic.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, the relation between sender device and the relay server is covered because we have that trust established during using device attestation block, which carries the certificate specific to the device and the root of trust. It's shared between sender and the relay. We find that it's less important to establish the same level of trust between the relay and the receiver. Let's put it this way, but we are open to discussion. If you find really good arguments to establish the same level of trust, we have an option to introduce the same level of authentication attestation between the recipient and the relay server.
Sorry, this is Nick also from Alphabet. I want to just chime in for your concern about maybe like the mom and pop shop server just getting all these inundated like traffic for it. I think maybe that's where you were headed. I think on like the recipient side, this will vary per vertical, of course, depending on if they want to use the relay server. But at least when it comes to things like the CCC and for the digital card keys, there is an allow list of different known relay server that we would want to use. So the recipient would have to choose from one of those relay server. Otherwise, we will not just simply reach out to any kind of random URL that's been sent from even if it was from like the owner.
Yeah, I mean the random URL consideration is kind of what I was going for next too. But if the plan is that there would be an allow list of appropriate,
There certainly will be. Yep.
Okay. That would be my main suggestion. Thank you.
Eric Scrolla, I just want to put a pin in this that part of the discussion because actually I don't really understand why there should be an allow list of permitted servers. Because as far as I can tell, none of the security properties depend on that. So it seems like some other property, which is unclear to me. So let's just say that that's not decided. There are, it seems to me that there are two assumptions being made here that like perhaps people are having trouble like not being as explicitly stated as one might like. One is that the channel that the sender and receiver have to them, available to them, is not sufficiently capable to deliver arbitrary amounts of data. So it is encrypted, but it cannot deliver arbitrary amounts of data. Is that correct? Okay. So that's hence the relay server, because otherwise you would just like spin up your WhatsApp channel and then the whole thing are WhatsApp, right? Okay. And the second is that the sender is not able to transfer the credentials directly to the recipient because it requires the cooperation of the credential server. Correct?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So I think that's like, without saying that I agree with everything here, that's how we get to this design. There's those two constraints. Because otherwise, if Jim Fenton says, you would just like spin up Signal and like shift the entire thing over like over Signal, right? Okay.
Maybe to your point, we could add in a constraint section to our draft. Maybe that would be really helpful.
So Colin Jenkins, I think my question was, I think Ecker more or less asked it, but can you say a little bit more about what the constraints on that out-of-band channel are that you're assuming and what we need? I mean, is that something that can be discussed in the sense requires trying to get just a better feel of what you see the limit of that so that we can design to it?
So we've been thinking about the constraint for that messaging channel as any, we want to be able to use any messaging channel that users can talk over, including like writing the URL on a piece of paper and giving it to someone. So any messaging channel that can transfer, 100 characters or less, kind of as our constraint or lack of constraints.
I mean, makes sense. Can you say a little bit more about what's driving you to that sort of size or the ways you imagine this being transferred that would put to that? I'm just trying to reverse out the requirements here.
I think primarily user experience. So we want users to be able to share their credentials over any messaging channel that they are already talking to.
Just a minute.
Sure.
What messaging channel does, so obviously that's already way too long for me to type in, okay? So they're not being shared that way from a user experience, obviously. So which message channel is it that would practically be used that's causing a limit? And what's that limit looking like? Like 100 is pretty small.
Yeah, I think one of the common ones was like SMS has 240 characters. That was one of the main.
MMS doesn't have that limit. I mean, like.
I think this is an excellent discussion for,
Okay, so I mean, I
for
think
the mailing list later, but it is an important aspect to cover.
Right. Look, I'm not expressing opinion on it. I'd be fine like saying it has to work over SMS for that channel. That'd be a fine requirement. Or no, we're okay with MMS over that channel or whatever. I just think that that's worth poking on sort of what drives that limit a bit.
Yeah. I think I can answer that more or less. Like SMS is in scope. Email is in scope. WhatsApp, iMessage.
I think it's great, but I don't think the requirement is that anybody be able to answer all of these things right now, right? I mean, let's just keep like put a pin in this, and this goes into a requirements document. It's
Victor Duchovny. I wonder how much attention is being paid to potential abuse. Is this a kind of a standardized phishing channel, effectively, where somebody can start soliciting credentials from me, and if I'm a naive user, I will start giving them away to all kinds of parties who may misrepresent who they are or what they want, or why I should give the credentials to them. What's the story on protecting the mostly naive audience that's likely to encounter this facility?
So because the relationship between the sender and the credential authority to get the provisioning information happens before this protocol comes in, we don't think there could be much or any phishing on the sending of a credential side. It would only be sharing credentials to someone that maybe they didn't necessarily want.
Right. Well, that's the key question, right? I mean, sure, I have a pre-established relationship with the relay, bank, car company, whoever. Now somebody encourages me to share. Do I really know who they are? How easy is it to misrepresent what's going on to me, and so on? How much thought or attention needs to be paid to this?
Great question. So potentially there is a risk, like when we generate that mailbox and we generate a share URL to that mailbox, right? As Nick previously said, the list of the relay addresses, trusted relay addresses, it's limited by the allow list. Second, the content of the preview, which I will discuss later, the content shall be trusted by relay server. So it shall originate from a trusted server. For us, it's device manufacturer server. So the picture that they will see in the preview, it won't come from popandmom.com, whatever, flowers.com. It will come from a trusted server. And I think it's one of the security considerations mentioned in the draft.
Is this what the recipient sees or what the potential sender sees?
The recipient sees, because
no, I'm interested in what the potential sender sees when somebody says, please share the credential with me. I am your sister stuck in some
So-
place where I need help.
This is something we're thinking about a lot, but I don't think it's part of the proposal, at least at this point. Maybe that should be something that we look at further.
Yeah, the one piece of our proposal that does cover that is well, I guess we haven't gone to the solution yet, but we have a delete mailbox API. And the idea is that you could call that at any moment, not just, so if you were to send that share link, and you're like, oh no, like even if like you're kind of talking about a malicious situation, but even on an accident, you sent it to the wrong person, you're able to go delete that mailbox before that recipient has provisioned. So that's from our perspective, how we could have a little bit of security about that in the relay server. And then from a larger perspective, that credential authority is in charge. So like worst case scenario, everything goes wrong. You could talk to that credential authority and say, hey, this was wrong, please revoke that. And we have that like third party outside the relay server that could handle that situation.
So just wanted to confirm whether a part of the question is the trust relationship between the sender device and the relay. And what's the attack here?
The sender device gets tricked. Like the sender human gets tricked into sharing.
Or is it like user experience with the device when they unintentionally share something they didn't want to?
It's really a whole system feature. It's to what extent will I know who I'm really sharing with? It applies more broadly, really, than this particular thing, but naming is hard. And this thing really automates it to a degree where the attacks become easier, I think. And do I really know who I'm sharing with? How strong is that? When it's intermediated by a third party, especially.
Yeah, I want to just chime in again. This is Nick from Alphabet again. I think this whole identity of sender receiver, especially on the receiver side, maybe this is a little bit more difficult to solve and definitely out of scope for the working group that we're trying to propose here for the solutions. The relay server here is not an arbiter of like identity here, and we're really trying to at least right now, maybe in the future, we may have ideas around this, but not trying to solve the identity issue or be the authority of that.
Yeah, I think, this is Matt again. I think just to add on to what Nick said, when you really come down to it, you're initiating the transfer of a credential. Let's pretend you use SMS or email, just to use an example. You don't, as the sender, really have confirmation of the identity of the recipient. You only know that, for example, I've been texting this person at this, SMS number for, 5 years. Technically, 1 minute before you issue that share, they could have gotten a new phone number, and that phone number could have been reassigned from the carrier, and in possession from somebody else. And so I think, to Nick's point and to, Dimitri's point, it really, the onus is really on the sender to make sure that they're sending the credential to a channel that is tenured from their perspective, and that they have confidence of who is on the other end of whatever communication channel they choose to send it through. And that doesn't really have anything to do with the relay server in my mind at all.
All right. We're at the point today where we're going to switch over to talk a little bit about the proposed solution.
Leif,
Yes,
I have a minutes question for you.
then go ahead.
You said at one point, does the working group want a separate threat model draft? And then later you said.
No, I said, does the working group want a separate requirements draft, actually? That could include a threat model discussion.
Okay.
At least that was my
But you
intention.
also later said something about an assumptions draft. Are those all in one?
I don't remember using that term exactly, but
Okay,
I would
it was
assume
just-
that we would follow the typical model of IETF working groups of having a requirements draft that includes, enough of these things to make sure that everybody.
Hi, Roman Danilio as the responsible AD. We'll take the document thing offline because we made some decisions in the charting process not to do separate architecture and requirements documents. So we'll sort it out.
All right. All right. I think, Prachi, you would have to step forward to the Yes, there we go. And we can continue. There we go.
Hello, my name is Dmitry. I will present to you a proposed solution to the problem of transferring digital credential securely. So, thank you. The crux of our proposed solution is a relay server that facilitates a short-lived communication channel between sender and receiver devices. Sender and receiver devices will communicate over that relay server using a single mailbox. All the messages will be encrypted using asymmetric encryption key or secret. Communication over a relay server is completely decoupled from the provisioning logic. And the content of the messages is opaque to the relay server. Relay shall not have any visibility to the content or sensitive information within the encrypted provisioning information. And the content shall never be revealed to it. Some metadata may be visible, such as format type, which is required to define whether it's stateless or stateful flow. Let's walk through the solution at a very high level. So the sender device initiates the transaction by uploading provisioning information to the relay server, creating a mailbox uniquely identified by a mailbox identifier. And then it sends a share URL containing secret over a separate channel, SMS, email, WhatsApp, to the receiver device. The receiver device downloads the content, decrypts it using the secret, and provisions a new credential to the device. The process of redeeming a credential given a provisioning information is out of scope for this working group. Next slide, please. We defined two data flows here. One is stateless, another is stateful. Relay for stateless, relay facilitates a single unidirectional data transfer from sender to relay to receiver. New credential is generated by Credential Authority here. In a stateful flow, a relay server facilitates multiple data transfers to prepare credential data and for registration or provisioning by receiver. A relay server does not limit the number of such data transfers between sender and receiver. New credential scheme material is generated by a receiver device according to CCC spec, for instance, for example here, and it needs to be authorized by sender. Hence, an additional round trip is required. The details will be provided later on in a couple of slides when I go through the data flow. Now we're going to discuss our solution on the API level. For our solution, we describe the relay storage as mailbox. They are simple data stores allowing to be written to and read from. So to begin, we create a mailbox. It would be at the beginning of the transfer flow. A sender device would call a relay server to create a mailbox storing encrypted provisioning information. The relay server would generate a unique mailbox identifier and for that data and return a share URL pointing to that mailbox. When receiving share URL, most messaging applications will perform a GET request to read display information preview in Open Graph data format. The messaging application on the receiver will, if it supports Open Graph format, it will generate a credential preview in a messaging app so that the user can realize what they are accepting before they add the credential. And this is mostly for user experience, better user experience. When a user has clicked on the link and accepted the share, The receiver device will go read the secure information from the relay mailbox in order to fetch encrypted provision information. It will use the secret passed in the share URL in order to decrypt it and provision the credential to the device. For situations that require multiple round trips to the relay server, we have an Update Mailbox API. Here, sender and receiver devices could upload and update the same mailbox in a limited time in accordance to the protocol they are following. You can imagine a back and forth between sender and the receiver device, where each device reads and updates the information with their own. Once the transfer is complete, there is a Delete Mailbox API in order to clean up. This way we can ensure that mailboxes are purged after the transfer process is finished. Also, it allows users to cancel the transfer process if they choose so by deleting the mailbox and rendering any share URL useless. Now let's walk through the sharing process in details. We have the following actors: sender device, a receiver device, a relay server, and an optional actor, Credential Authority. So, which is out of scope for this working group, but given here for clarity. So first, sender chooses what part of credential to transfer and initiates the process. Sender device makes a call to the Credential Authority in order to get provisioning information. It generates a secret and encrypts the content of the provision information with that secret. Third, it makes a call to the relay server, creates a mailbox, and uploads the encrypted content to the relay server. A relay server generates a new mailbox identifier, builds a share URL link, returns it to the sender device. Fourth, sender device sends the share URL with a secret in the URL fragment over a separate channel. As I said, SMS, email, WhatsApp, iMessage, to the receiver device. Fifth, the receiver device. There is a messaging application which sees the incoming message. It makes a GET request and read display information, generates a preview, shows it to the user. User sees a new message as a credential preview in a messaging app and decides to accept the share, clicks on it. Share URL is forwarded to the platform-specific credential management application, for instance, wallet. 6, a receiver device makes a read secure information call to the relay server, downloads the provisioning information, decrypts it using secret in fragment part of the share URL. It gets the provision information as a result. Seventh, receiver device makes a call to provisioning authority in order to redeem provision information for credential information, and then provisions a new credential to the device. And final step 8, receiver deletes the mailbox. And this concludes the stateless flow. Next slide, please. In a stateful flow, there is no credential authority per se. Instead, a pair of sender and receiver device act together as a credential authority, generating new credential information and authorizing it for a new device. And sharing flow has additional steps after step 6 comparing to the previous stateless flow. So let's start with 7. Receiver device generates a new key material for the receiver, updates provision information with key signing request, and uploads the content to the relay server using Update Mailbox API. 8, sender device reads updated provision information from the mailbox and receives key signing request. 9, sender authorizes new receiver's key material in a key signing response and updates the provisioning info, uploads it to the mailbox with update mailbox call. 10, receiver device downloads the updated provisioning info, decrypts it, and provisions new credential locally. Then, finally, the receiver device deletes the mailbox. And this concludes the stateful flow. So we just presented to you the problem and the solution to the transferring digital credential securely between two devices. As we stated in the beginning, the proposed solution is based on the transfer of authorization information or provisioning information that we called it previously between two devices in order to obtain new credential from the Credential Authority, rather than transferring original credential with all related cryptographic key material. We address both privacy and security concerns and requirements to the solution using mechanisms defined in the draft document. Please feel free to read the draft document at the following URL. So thank you very much for showing interest to this working group. We really hope that more people will participate in this working group, and we hope our proposal will be adopted by IETF community. And now we move on to Q&A session.
All right, before everybody rushes to the mics again, I want to ask who, a show of hand, quick show of hands, who's read the draft? Well, that's good. You can raise your hand like kind of like this, right? All right, that's good. It's a good size number of people. All right, Victor is.
Hi. The protocol looks a lot like GSS API embedded in HTTP with the credentials of the receiver sent asynchronously so that they can participate in the ongoing conversation. Is this roughly correct? Have you looked at GSS API? Because in some sense, the state machine is sort of indistinguishable from what goes on in GSS.
Good question. We looked into a number of protocols, but not into that precise. I'm not familiar with that.
I'm just trying to tease apart the pieces here. So suppose we relax the requirement that you have to go over a channel that will only carry a small number of bytes. How much of this is left?
That's a very good point. We do consider that different credentials may have different value, and based on that, they may have different requirements and additional mechanisms that we can enforce in addition to that shared channel.
Where are those enforced?
I believe part of them will be enforced as, let's say, for the car key, enforced by a CCC standard at the time of provisioning. There are multiple mechanisms that we can utilize, additional verification codes, second factor, and such.
No, I think you lost me. I mean, so like fundamentally what you got is you got a system where you got a Dropbox on the server, and the initiator sends the rest of the Dropbox to the receiver, and then they bounce back and forth messages to the Dropbox. So, but the Dropbox doesn't make any of the content of the messages. So my question is, if we just assume the channel had like wide capacity instead of narrow capacity, what will be left of this protocol?
I think this is Matt Byington again. I think there are some really simple, borderline non-technical reasons as well, Eric. Like you don't want to see like an X509 encoded public key, coming through on a communication channel that's shown to end users. That would be very confusing to them, right? in like an email or something like that.
You're bringing a whole bunch of constraints I didn't stipulate. So if we just assume we had a channel that had wide capacity, like, and yes, it was controlled entirely by the endpoints, like what we want in the protocol.
Yeah, it would absolutely work. You wouldn't need a relay if you ignore user experience, and if you send the messages back and forth, it would totally work. Yeah.
But you say ignore user experience, right? But you already have to modify the like there's a bunch of modifications being made in various places, and like the operating system is completely able to, like, for instance, have some SMS messages bypass the SMS viewer and go directly to something. Like that's entirely within the scope of the operating system. So like what I'm trying to push on is like the requirements of the system is like you're creating this like kind of like weak sauce replica of WebDAV that then like that then is being used, and like we have like a zillion ways to like send messages back and forth from people, and so I'm trying to figure out like why we're creating like this involves creating like a new messaging system that like has this weird kind of Dropbox metaphor, and trying to figure out why we're doing that. And so is there any other reason other than the channel has narrow capacity, and that you think you have to detour the messages out of the user's like mailbox?
Yeah, just to reply to your operating system comment, the operating system is not in control of the UI on the screen if it's like a third-party standalone messaging app like WhatsApp or WeChat or something like that, right? How would the operating system help the experience there?
Well, it seems like if the receiver is going to engage in some special protocol here, the receiver has to have some smarts already. It's got to treat these URLs in the correct way, or is the receiver just doing a normal GET request to this? And so if you assume that the receiver is doing special logic, presumably they could also do special UI logic.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be possible to do special UI logic in an application that controls its own UI when it's being drawn on the screen, like an email client or WhatsApp or WeChat or any of those type of programs. It's worth noting those programs would do a simple HTTP GET on that URL. In fact, they do that on every URL, at least with the HTTP protocol, and that's where you would get some of this Open Graph preview coming into play, right? That they would do that, but they those operating systems would need special logic, yes, to actually receive the share, ingest it, and get the credential provisioned. Totally agree with that.
So, I guess the way I'm drilling into is this in any way not to be messaging protocol? Like, this is a messaging protocol, right? That just happens to only be used for this one purpose.
It's not. I wouldn't say it's a messaging protocol.
How not?
I wouldn't say so.
Why?
It's a protocol to solve this given problem, to transfer provision information from one device to another.
That's technology, not technology.
Well, maybe I could draw a different analogy here. There was a bunch of discussion in dispatch on Monday of file transfers over limited channels. Like you see this all the time in messaging systems, where you transfer a URL to a file that's stored somewhere else. You send the URL in the messaging channel, and then the receiver goes and downloads the thing. And people, commonly augment this with a little bit of crypto, so that the URL either has a key embedded in it or has a key alongside of it, so the server where the file lives doesn't see the plain text content. So it's largely similar to what we're doing here. So I guess what I'm wondering is, to what degree is this kind of an instantiation of that design pattern, in the sense of being a way to transfer some sensitive data over a where you have a limited channel that you maybe have less trusted, maybe slightly less trusted. You're still sending the key over it, but maybe you trust the server to provide some access controls or something. And to what degree is it specific to this credential use case? So to restate that, like, it seems like you're talking about using this transfer protocol to transfer credential-related information. Could I not use the same mechanism you've laid out here to send cat pictures or nuclear submarine designs or whatever sensitive thing I'm trying to send to Ecker.
Yes, so definitely. What you propose, what you described here was a more generic, let's say, some distributed file system, right? When we can store something and then the reader can read it. It wasn't the goal of this solution to transfer generic files, and we had a number of the goals, like which were defined in the very beginning. We needed it to be a short, like token, right? Provisioning information. We needed to that token to be delivered to one device, and we wanted the transfer process to be limited between one sender and a receiver. So once the transfer started, we wanted that limitation. One receiver can read that or update that and provision. Third, we wanted that temporary storage not to be able to look into what was transferred. Like not to be completely unaware. It's opaque for them. That was goal number 2. Third, we were heavily trying to solve problem of mobile devices, not always having cellular coverage all of the time. And we still wanted the problem to be solvable under those conditions. And there are additional limitations due to the nature of those mobile devices, such as we added potential push notifications in order to react as soon as the data was updated, right, on the relay server. So this problem is very narrow focused on a given use case. We didn't want it to be a generic solution for file transfer.
So let me just follow into that, Richard, here. So Cullen Jennings, before I want to ask about something you actually just said in your last thing, and I stood up before to ask about, which is push notifications, because well before we even started on the BOF of this, one of the things that made me think this was quite different than many of our other mailbox protocols at IETF was a requirement for the relay to be able to, or the mailbox to be able to send push notifications to clients. And that hasn't been mentioned in the stuff today. And I was wondering, is that still an extension you're looking at? Is that part of the problem space? Because that obviously changes the design a little bit if we need that down the road one way or another. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about how the thoughts on that have evolved over time.
That is definitely still something we're looking at, and it's included in our draft proposal. Right now, we're thinking about it pretty generically, where the push notification type can be specified, and then each relay server operator can work with different device OEMs to interact with their push notification infrastructure. But that's definitely a requirement for the mobile devices.
Yeah, and when I present a solution, I try to present it in a very simplistic way.
Hi, Rowan May, Wire. So I've heard half a dozen to a dozen different requirements that weren't explicitly mentioned in the first presentation. And I think you've got, the reason that you have many people asking questions is they're kind of trying to poke around and ask basically requirements questions. It's very traditional for a new working group or even for a BOF to start off with requirements and then to go to a protocol. And if you do start with some pre-existing notion of what your protocol should be, I didn't read the complete document, but I did scan through quite a bit of it, and there's no real mention of the protocol. So I would like to recommend that you please do a document that gives those nice use cases that you had in your presentation and lists requirements, including these subtle requirements. And then I think that you're going to get some people are going to poke at those requirements. Some people are going to add requirements or propose new ones that you might like. And you may end up with a protocol very much like the one that you came up with, or somebody may just show you that they say, oh, by the way, I can do everything in these requirements with this combination of stuff that already exists. Thank you.
Thank you for the suggestion. I think that's a great idea.
Just to add to that, I think that your point is really good. And I think that a large answer to a lot of your questions, which might not be as satisfactory, is just when we're looking at all these different existing applications or ways that we could have transferred, we just always found something that was missing. It's like, oh, this is almost what we needed. Oh, but we needed this one requirement. So hopefully whenever we create that requirements document, we'll make it clear.
Sorry, just to add to that, we seriously considered it was a problem where we tried to find the right balance between security and usability, as it is always the case with security solutions. So we tried to provide the best possible user experience. That's why sometimes we lack security requirements. And there is a security considerations section at the end of the draft document. It might address some of the questions.
Requirements.
Okay. Point taken. Thank you.
So, Chris Clemens, Comcast. It's not clear to me that it is possible to develop a solution that works for credentials specifically without specifying what kind of credentials and making them completely opaque, without making it also just as useful for cat pictures. And so I mean, to me, the messaging protocol comments are exactly on point. And so I find myself wondering, what kind of relationship does the relay server have with both the sender and the receiver of the credentials? Does it know their identities? Does it keep track of them?
So the sender has a relatively tight relationship with the relay server. They're able to generate attestations to prove that they have rights to create mailboxes, but those attestations are anonymous, and it's a very important feature of the relay server that they don't know any identifiable information about senders or
Okay,
receivers.
so what's preventing the relay server from just being free storage on the internet?
Nothing is. Now the question is, what makes the sender to start using that relay server? So there should be certain level of trust between the sender and the relay server. So the sender starts using given relay server. Mm-hmm.
Right. So the sender starts using the relay server to store his cat pictures, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. I assume that the relay server has finite resources and wants to allocate them independently, and so it probably wants to try to keep track of who's doing this, right?
Good point. So that's why we precisely mentioned in the draft document that we want to enforce relay server not to see anything sensible, like any sensitive information. That's why we mentioned device attestation, potential, like optional device attestation. And that device attestation is the basis of trust between sender and receiver. If sender covers his cat picture with the device attestation and a relay server trusts that sender, trusts that device attestation, which is anonymous, potentially, which doesn't reveal any user information to the relay trusts that.
I want to also.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I think I just interrupted somebody.
Sorry, Matt. Okay, let me just add a few more comments to that. I think like any other messaging channel, you could try to use the relay server outside of its intended use. That's always something that could happen with any kind of like messaging system, right? The only kind of thing is the sender or the user, are they okay with the restriction that is sent? I mean, that are set for this messaging channel. And that's really the restriction that's applied here, right? Are you okay with having a short-lived TTL to send your cat pictures, Or, are you okay with just sending this information just to one other party and not to like one-to-many messaging channel, things like that. So the idea is like, yes, you could use this channel outside of the intended purpose, but are you okay with the restriction that's going to be set forth in that relay server?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just one other little piece is that you could configure your mailboxes, this is dependent on whoever is implementing this, but you could configure your mailbox to be really small. So for us, like this provisioning information is going to be quite small, so less than a cat picture. So then you make it so unusable that no one would want to use it except for your purpose. Not to say that's like 100% like foolproof, but it gets a little closer.
So I just want to make sure the people who are still in the queue, are you actually in the queue or did you? Yes, excellent. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a brief amendment to my earlier comments and be clear that I didn't mean to be negative on this work. I was actually kind of yes-anding. Like clearly, I think that it seems clear that this is an okay starting point, at least for the credential use case. I think all I meant to suggest is that it could be useful to some other parts of the IETF if we look and clarify those boundaries and see if it can be expressed in a way that would be useful to some other folks. So just to think about how to express things more generally.
Thank you, Richard, for clarifying that.
So I'm just like trying to wrap my head around this attestation thing. So the attestation in this case is I have a car key. Like, what is the attestation representing that causes the relay server to allow me to store data on it?
Yeah. So the protocol defines the attestation pretty generally and then leaves it up to how the sender and the receiver device want, like what type of attestation they want to use. But generally, it's just around the user and the device being authentic and not like a device farm.
Okay.
Nothing to do with the credential on the device.
But identifies the user, correct? Effectively?
Can I just jump in on this one as well? Sorry, Dmitry. I think the protocol or like the relay server proposal has this attestation, which is very, very generalized, right? I think it's kind of left up to the implementation of it to create this relationship of what that attestation really means. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an identity source. It could just be a very generalized, like even just like key pair where you have like a root key that you could identify some hardware that's been that has like the public key that's stamped in from the manufacturing process or something as simple as that, so that you trust that this device has some form of authority to create this mailboxes on your relay server. But this again it's more implementation detail rather than it is a restriction on the proposal itself. So
well, I don't think
you deem.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, if you deem that you don't need this kind of security, like if you are implementing this relay server yourself for whatever other purpose that you want to use for your own proprietary kind of transfer of credential, and you want to make it open, and you don't have to use that attestation if you don't want to.
Well, so I guess is your assumption that the choice of relay server is determined by the application domain for the type of credential being transferred?
Yes, yeah, I think it can be, right? It depends on the implementer and on the person adopting the credential, right? You might have a home key and you want to use a relay server. You have many different choices of using either implementing your own or just using something that has been implemented, but it all kind of depends on the implementer of all of this.
No, I'm not really following. So, I have the Hilton app, hypothetically. And I push the button because I want to share my room key with DKG. And I met him in the bar earlier, as he mentioned, one of the 5 people. So I push a button, that's got to go somewhere, right? Like I don't choose some relay. I'm not going to choose a relay server, right? So where does it go, and who makes the decision, and what creates authorization for that?
If you're staying at Hilton, I think the short answer is if you're staying at Hilton would try to decide where that relay server will be at, right? They're the one who wants to do the transferring of that hotel key. They would be the domain owner of that. Now they might have options at the genesis of creating the application of which relay server to use, whether they host their own or maybe use one that already exists. That would be entirely up to Hilton.
Okay, so the reason I'm pushing on this is because if the security requirements of the system depend on access control as to who's allowed to write to the relay server, then those are part of the scope of the system and they have to be defined. And if it depends on hardware attestation, that has to be defined. And it's like the entire, this goes back to requirements of describing how the system works, right? And so you can't just say it's going to be stored somewhere if security requirements of the system depend on having that defined. So so maybe the answer is it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what relay server it is, but that's then we need to know that. So the second reason I'm pushing on this is because it seems like one of the consequences of this potentially is that because this is if every relay server creates its own, if every application has its own relay server, then this creates a new locus of tracking of what credentials are being shared with other people besides the credential server. And so that seems like potentially undesirable property as opposed to some more generic system. So is there some way to remove the property that this creates a graph of everybody who's shared with everybody else?
The idea is not to create this graph, right?
But how, well, what graph is created, right? How is it not created?
So for if the hotel owns the relay server, they're already, as the Credential Authority, creating a graph of who's shared with who. But maybe to your point, we need to specify more about the device attestation to really show that it's anonymous and not privacy bearing.
Well, I mean, yeah, if that's part of the system, yeah.
So a simple question, simple answer to a question, it's up to Credential Authority to manage whoever owns the key at the moment, make any connections with them. That's specifically why we put the credential management out of scope for this solution. For us, for the relay server, it's just a set of calls, right? HTTP calls coming from different IP addresses. And the IP addresses is what we are supposed to be able to track, the only piece. We shall not be able to see the content, what's inside, right? What kind of credential? Is there any sensitive info there? And that was the goal of this solution and the security requirement. I don't know if it answers your question.
It depends on how things are built.
By the way, I'm about to lock the queue. If somebody is just sitting at the edge of their seat about to get up, now is the time to do that.
Hi, it's Peter again from DSEC. So I just heard that the relay server may be operated by the Credential Authority, which of course is fine, but it raises I'm not sure if I understand right. So my understanding was that when I want to share a credential, the credential is already there, and then I decide to share it. So at that point, when I somehow upload the share to the relay server, the Credential Authority is not involved. I thought it just uploaded anywhere, like one server that supports this relay protocol. So that made me wonder why that would have to do with the relay, with the Credential Authority operating that relay server. And so that made me wonder one more thing. So how is it supposed to work in practice, like on my device and on the recipient's device? Am I supposed to have an app, for example? So I receive a credential from somewhere, then I hit share this credential, then an app pops up and it will upload it to some relay server that perhaps I can select, or perhaps it is specific to the app, I don't know that. Then I will get a link, then I will share this through some other channel with the recipient, and then what happens? The person clicks on the link, and then how does the retrieval of the content work? It's a post request, so I can imagine two ways. Either the recipient also has the app, in which case that may also be tied to this relay server and only work with certain ones, or it may just fire up the browser, in which case for decryption, it would be necessary to fetch some JavaScript, which is actually from the relay server. So there is a circular thing going on regarding trust. So the two questions I have in this regard are, Is this open to me operating my own relay server, for example? And if so, how would that fit in with this app? Would the app be specific to one operator? And how is the retrieval working with this JavaScript thing? So that's the first set of questions I have. After that, I have a different comment.
Awesome question. We definitely try to solve that problem. And number one, in order to be able to manage credentials on the device, you need some software. You definitely need either application like wallet or third-party application that recognizes this is credential. This is our credential provider. And it is aware of the process. Like, how do we generate that provision information? How do we which relay server to call in order to store that info? How do we pass the share URL as a link? At the same time, on the receiving device, what you're receiving is basically just a URL. You make a GET call, right? You get HTTP page with Open Graph in the header. And if your messaging app understands Open Graph, it will generate you preview. The next thing, when user clicks on that, like in the messaging app should be aware this belongs to the credential manager on the device. Whether it's wallet, third-party application, it needs to offload that. We have a simple mechanism doing that. If you can implement the same mechanism and integrate with the messaging app, if you want to write your own application, that's doable.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, both the sender and the receiver have an app, and the app would support that the sender configures any relay server. Is that correct?
We support, let's put it this way, like if we're talking about the precise solution that we want to implement or the general, potentially there is no limitation. Your application can use all the trusted relay servers. If you want to enforce the requirement that there is a certain level of trust between your application and the relay server, as we mentioned, the attestation, you need to be able to share some trust, right? A number of certificates to be able to realize this is valid, this is trusted. So there might be some limitations if you want to establish that level of trust, if it makes sense.
Just to answer your question about like if you were to create your own app and like wanted to run your own relay server, so I think what would probably happen is that you as the sender are effectively choosing the relay server you want. So if you're running your own app, that would probably give you one option, which is that app's that app's relay server. So then you send that link over to your recipient device, and say that recipient doesn't have your new app, like IETF app for fun. Then when you click on the link, you'd be doing a get, and you'd probably just be showing it'd pop into your whatever web browser you have on that device, and you'd probably have to have information about how to actually gather that, credential information off that relay server. So you'd probably have to download that app, and then that app would know what to do with that link. So it's handled very similarly for us between wallets and etc. But if you had two separate apps, like a Credential Authority, they could potentially do this entire process the same way that we're doing it.
Okay. If you had some other pattern in the URL that would allow this kind of URL to be recognized as a share link independently of the relay server that's used, so independently of the host name, for example, by introducing a schema prefix for that, then you could have a recipient app that works for all relay servers. And I think that would make things easier. For example, also address the concern that was there earlier when somebody mentioned resources from people, uploading cat pictures, whatever. So like those people could run their own relay servers and upload their cat pictures, and then that could be retrieved with any app. So that's the first set of things that I want to say. And the second is just a comment. I think the term mailbox is a contradiction of terms because it's not for arbitrary mail, and it's just for credentials in this proposal. And also in a mailbox, I would expect that I can have several messages which I can delete independently, but the delete semantics here delete the whole mailbox. So it doesn't seem like a mailbox to me. And so it's more like a single exchange point somehow, and I would recommend renaming this term.
We can definitely bring that into the email thread and make one about what to update instead of mailbox. And to your previous point, I think that as we gather more interest and participation through this working group, we can definitely figure out, hey, maybe there is just a prefix or some format that all sharing links for any relay server should follow. At the moment, we don't have as much of that participation, and we're looking for that. So if you guys want to implement this, let us know, and we can figure that one out too. I think it's a good idea.
Chris Lemons, Comcast. So you said at one point, and we just touched on a number of these, but you said at one point that the expectation is that for a given type of credential from a given credential authority, that the expected relay server would be operated by the same sort of entity that operates that authority. And that's certainly a conceivable scheme. Is there anything that you see that could possibly prevent a credential from being transferred using a relay server that was not authorized by the credential authority? Or is the choice of relay server 100% within the grasp of the sender?
So the choice of relay server is really up to the credential authority making the share, not up to the sender.
How do you enforce that?
So I think what Alex meant, there should be level of trust between credential authority and the sending application. So that's obvious, right? Because credential authority.
No, that's not obvious.
Oh, okay, that's out of scope. Let's put it this way: out of scope for this working group. Now, the level of trust between sender and the relay server is up to the implementer. If, let's say, I want to be able to trust based on the hardware-based certificates or on like some sort on PKI level, we need to establish that, and we need to implement mechanism covering the content which is uploaded. Let's say I'm a sender device, right? And I'm selecting not abc.com, but cda.com. And there is no established trust between the second choice and the sender device. It very much depends on the implementation, on the security policy of the second relay server, whether to trust that sender. And the same holds true to the sender application. Someone may crack the code of that credential manager application and redirect them to a different relay server. So that combination might not necessarily work. Both depends on the implementation. That's why we mentioned that such things as device attestations, they are optional based on the security level selected by each implementation.
Right. So I understand how the relay server can ask for attestations, credentials, some sort of authorization from the sender.
Mm-hmm.
And so relay servers could reject senders that they don't approve of for whatever reason. Sure. But what I don't see is how CAs can influence, and I realize that the definition of CA is outside of the scope here, but I think it's important because I think we might be relying on it for something here. Because I don't understand how the CA influences what relay server the sender can choose. If the sender chooses a different relay server that is willing to accept it, but that second relay server is not approved of by the issuer of whatever credential they want to send, who stops that? How does that happen? And why does it matter?
Hi, this is Nick again. I just want to, it doesn't matter. I think you're right, it doesn't matter. So CA does not enforce what relay server gets used. So, you have the, credential provisioning information that just gets sent between two devices, and it doesn't care how that was done. The only time it may care is at the very, end when the receiver maybe tries to provision a credential with the provision authority that the right information is present there. So that communication channel that occurs to deliver that, provisioning information does not matter. It is not opinionated by the CA. At least that's how it is in terms of the proposal we're putting forth. Now, I think a lot of the confusion is like, we're not trying to be opinionated about the implementation of it. If you as like a private entity wants to have some form of security around like which relay server gets sent, then surely you could try to have like enhancement that you could put around it to ensure that. But that's not what we're baking into like the proposal in terms of like which relay server gets used, and it's not controlled by the CA.
Okay, so there's no technical or even policy reason why I couldn't run my own relay server, configure my devices to use my relay server, other than the people receiving the links might be confused when they receive a lemons.example.com address instead of a carkey.com example.com address.
I think that's exactly right. Yep. You have many different choices of which relay server to use, but what is expected relay server maybe from the recipient side, and that might be the factor that's involved here. So there needs to be at least some kind of agreement, at least on like the receiver and like from like the software side.
Right. And so that brings me to the last question I had, I hope, which is that when you receive one of these things, how do you know that it is a credential? Because I just got a link. How does my device know that that's a credential? And why does it not involve the content type?
Right. So that is, yeah. So in the URL itself, we do have a we call it vertical. It's a query parameter that tells you the type of vertical it is. Like if you're using a car key or transferring car keys or hotel keys, there may be something to denote that this is a credential transfer for like a car key. And furthermore, you could reach out to that relay server. There are information that you could look at after you've decrypted the message to see the type of credential that you're trying to transfer here. So there are more information in the encrypted portion after you decrypted.
Absolutely. Once I've got it decrypted, I have an object. I can probably figure out what to do with it. Are you suggesting that I'm going to read the URI and there's going to be special format for the URI? And if the URI is in a particular format and has magic query parameters that are registered somewhere, that's going to do a different thing?
So I think
I know. Sorry.
We have credential type metadata along with the encrypted information, and I mentioned it in the very beginning of presentation. So having read that information, this belongs to such and such format.
Okay, I think I'm good. Thank you.
I think the missing piece is that the URL could be registered by an app as a universal link that then knows how to handle it.
That includes it.
All right, Paul.
Paul Huffman, this may actually be a lead into what happens next, but I heard, and by the way, I have not read the draft. I was interested in the topic, but I'm like way out of my depth here. But I heard a lot of people asking questions with you guys saying, yes, we should add that to requirements. We should add that to the requirements. But then I heard Roman say there isn't going to be a requirements document. So are we talking about putting the requirements in the solution document and say, here were the requirements, here are the assumptions, and this is the solution, or doing something different? I am confused. And again, I know this is probably what's happening next, but I heard this over and over. It wasn't just, we need to do one requirement.
All right, I'm going to unlock the queue for the sort of what happens next discussion. So, there are many ways to do this, right? As Roman points out, this actually is in the charter, but if I'm correct, there's nothing stopping us from, for instance, from having a separate working on use requirements and problem statement in a separate draft and then folding it into the finished product as we.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would urge us strongly not to over-index on where we put the requirements.
Yeah.
We heard a long discussion that we want requirements. Let's write some text. And those of us kind of concerned on the process kind of side will figure out what the right way is to make sure that it appears and manifests in the right way in the working group right now.
That's right.
Yeah. Paul, are you still? You're in the queue. Yes, I mean, that would be very helpful to me. I mean, I think what would be helpful to me would be like, here's the requirements, and then here are some of the obvious things you might try to do, and this is why they don't work because of like requirement 19. Because I think what you're hearing a lot of is like people sort of looking at this and maybe not seeing the complete picture that you seem to see, and saying like, well, why don't you do this? And so, like, I think it'd be very helpful if you could like, I don't think it has to be like R1, R2, R3, R4, but I think if they're describing enough the problem space, that'd be fine. But I think if they're describing the problem space, so then people can look at it and be like, now I understand why the thing that like seems obvious is not obvious to you. That'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
Jason. I think it also like these are great slides and presentations, helped a lot. Like this has been really good today. I think it also would help some people, certainly myself, if you could just show the stuff that's like, here's how we imagine one way, like this is a small piece of a solution, right? This is a much broader thing. So take one instance of it, like the car unlock case or the hotel room case, and say like, look, here's sort of what one possible deployment of the full solution might look like with all the pieces. And here's where the pieces that the IETF's defining fit in, like right here in this little bit. But I mean, people are getting lost on like what the OS does, which is it the Hilton app, is it the wallet app? You know, there's a lot of different things floating around here in different apps and different relay servers. And not to say that we're trying to define that's the only way to deploy it or every way to deploy it or anything, but just give people a flavor of here's a possible implementation and deployment that uses this for the whole system, and here's all the pieces and what they look like. I think that would help people understand.
I think that's a really good feedback. I think, you know, we kind of index a little bit on the other side we wanted to make it so agnostic that we didn't want to bring in specific use cases to explore. But I think that's a really great point in trying to like have a projection of how this works, right? Given like an actual use case.
If you'd done what I asked for, I would have been here like, yeah, you should have brought in the specific generalized thing that we could use, and I would have asked for exactly that because that's IETF, and I apologize. But you know, like we'll get there.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Just one comment on anti-replay. My impression is so far that it's implemented by the relays rather than by the final credential issuer that completes the credential provisioning. If that's the case, then I can create a downstream relay that memoizes messages and makes it possible to duplicate the conversation to as many parties as I want. So that's something worth thinking about if it's important somehow to avoid replay, is that the system can be extended in such a way that replay becomes something I can build into it.
Yeah, so it's kind of built in two different ways. So one, the relay server, because the mailbox is actually deleted, but also if you remember in the first graph, we get that provisioning information from the Credential Authority. So you can think of that as a token that the Credential Authority is storing. So when that Credential Authority then sees that token, it'll say like, okay, that's the person. And then say that you got that provisioning information, put it somewhere else for a little while, and then tried again. That Credential Authority should also like decline it. So we kind of have like two parties.
Right. But my recipient can be an actual downstream relay that facilitates replay. So I can deliver the credential to my own relay, which unbeknownst to the real relay is actually a relay that memoizes messages. And then that thing can not delete messages and allow them to be replayed and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, I think there's different layers of security that we have to be aware of, right? I think, you know, the relay replay attack here for the relay server is something that we'll try to sufficiently address on that relay server part. But ultimately, I think there needs to be an additional security when it comes to the actual credential and how that is spec'd out. Like for one example I'll give is that for CCC, there's also an addition of something called an Immobilizer Token. So, you know, this is some unique token that you need to be presented with the car for it to accept the key and to operate the vehicle. So you can't just use the same, you know, Immobilizer token twice. So I think this is a combination of not just relying on the relay server itself, being like the end all for all replay attack. I think we'll do what we can on the messaging side of it, but you know, I think there needs to be additional security that we need to kind of look at in the actual credential protocols themselves.
All right, Nick, thank you. I think we have, with the last 5 minutes, I want to get to a couple of administrative stuff, including possibly if we can adopt the draft as a working group document. So that's. No, I'm going to ask for adoption of the working group document as draft as a working group document completely seriously. And if you want to be against that, you can do that, right? But I'm not joking. No. Yes, you can have opinions. I'm not joking.
I mean, given the tone of this discussion, I can't imagine how you possibly think it's ready.
Well, thank you. Well, you can have, again, right? It's perfectly reasonable to have opinions, right? But
what I was expressing.
Oh, thank you. So again, if I will still ask the working group whether you are whether whether you're for or against adopting the current draft, which is linked on the data tracker page as a working group document. Again, this means that the document is a starting point for work and that it is transferred, the change control is transferred to the working group. Right. If people want me to use the hand waving tool for this, I can do that. All right, let's set that up. Give me a second. So it's called draft secret, then shells transfer as. All right.
Give it 1 second, it'll come up on the screen.
Yeah. All right, we'll give it a few more minutes. There are about, let's see here, the number of people in the room kind of seem to match the people who have raised their hands at this point. We're still getting 1 or 2 people chiming in, but it's about 50-50 at this point, which is, I guess, a little bit too rough consensus to go ahead and adopt the current draft. So what we'll do here is that we'll ask the working groups,
I'm appealing right now how you just called that. Like it is below 50-50, and you know, said, hey, that's not quite rough consensus. Like,
no,
seriously?
No, but the rest of the statement was that we're not going to adopt it, right?
Okay.
Right?
I don't think that was a good way of characterizing it.
All right, fine. That's fine. Yeah, exactly. That's not consensus to adopt. All right. Exactly. It's not consensus to adopt. All right. Which means that we'll ask the authors to respin the document and keep working on it, and we'll come back to a later version. Now, I think what we've heard here is a clear consensus for some sort of requirements document. I think it's a good idea to put that in a separate document for now, and then we'll see if that gets merged into whatever this turns into. All right. And that's it. We'll certainly reschedule a meeting for London, and we'll see what happens then. Thank you very much for turning up, and thanks for a lot of energetic discussion.
I appreciate it. It's really good to see some interest. It's good to see. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm one of those people who does not ask whether this is the best solution to it, ask whether this is a viable solution to the problem you proposed. Obviously it is.
Mhm.
Well, at least it got it.
So I'm always just, so, you know, a lot of times things that I can take a surprising amount of time to get everybody up on the same page. not like, are there other solutions to this problem? Yes, of course, you don't tell me there are, right? Will this solution work is the one that I tend to see most, is it deployable? Will